Okay, hello. So welcome to Two Old Psychologists Talking About Stuff. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Rich, and a bright winter's morning it is indeed.
Feels a little bit Christmassy, don't you think?
Christmassy. That's an interesting observation.
So, in the spirit, we've invited a couple of friends along, more the merrier and all that. So, yeah, in a special edition, we've got 4 psychologists talking about Christmas. So, I guess we should ask them to say hello. Let's start with Rachel.
Hello. Really lovely to be here with you both. Quite excited to be seeing your faces and chatting with you.
Well, thank you for joining us at our Christmas special. So, do you want to say a little bit about yourself, Rachel? Just to tell the audience kind of who you are and what you're about?
Yeah, sure. I work as a consultant clinical psychologist in the NHS full-time. I work in Worcestershire mental health services, and I cover services for people in acute distress is the main kind of take home, and rehab services as well, but all inpatient or urgent care.
Okay, thank you. So that's Dr. Rachel Black.
That's right.
So people can stalk you then on the internet.
Yes.
So thank you, Rachel. Thanks for joining us. And Dawn, do you want to say hello?
Hi. Thanks for the invite to the party.
You're most welcome. So it'd be good if you could maybe say a few words about yourself too.
Okay, absolutely. So my name's Dawn Johnson and I work as a clinical psychologist. I'm now in private practice, so offering therapy and supervision and training using ACT predominantly and other contextual behavioural sciences as well.
Thank you, Dawn. So we should probably declare, there's a bit of an interest here, isn't there, in terms of us all being friends. We've kind of known each other for probably, I don't know, what do you think? Best part of 10 years?
I think that's a fair guess. Let's call it 10 years.
Bound together by our interest in all things contextual behavioural science and acceptance and commitment therapy. So a bit of a selected bunch. It would be unfair to sort of claim that we're a representative sample of psychologists. So it's probably just best to disclose that right now. Anyway, Christmas then. I guess this is one of those things that people have a range of opinion on. There's this sort of view of it as being this wonderful, joyous, happy time. And as a festival, I think it sort of sticks in the public consciousness much more than lots of other things. This may be something to talk about, like why is Christmas a bit more popular than Easter, for example? Why is Halloween seemingly becoming more interesting than Easter? There's lots of things that we could talk about, but let's start with this sort of position statement on Christmas. So Ray, I'm going to start with you. What does Christmas mean to you? Where do you stand on it?
I got to admit, I rather like Christmas. I kind of like the idea that sort of in the middle of winter, when the nights are longest, there's a kind of little episode of time where some people, if they're lucky, get the chance to take a little bit of time out. And some people, if they're lucky, get the chance to hang out with family and friends and find some ways of expressing warmth and emotion towards each other and sharing a bit of time together. When it works well in that way, I think that can be a pretty healthy thing.
Okay. Rachel, anything you want to add? Where do you stand on Christmas?
I like any kind of ritual that gets people together, I guess. I think some of the issues with Christmas, as with other holidays, is that there's an expectation, isn't there, of how you do it. And for me, it's more about the principles of sharing time with other people, whoever that might be, or giving people the opportunity to have some company. Or when Ray was describing it, I imagined sort of almost like a light in the darkness, a time when you come together and there's some sort of light that kind of can kind of help us to kind of punctuate winter. I guess that's how I see it. And that could be anything, but I guess having something that everybody knows is at the same time can be really helpful, because then we have a way of kind of structuring it and coming together. It is really difficult for some people, and that's always in my mind, I guess. So it's always there, but it doesn't take away, I think, for me, from the benefits that can be drawn.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very connecting, and it's a kind of, I like the idea of punctuation. There's a kind of moment here where we all get together, and yeah, I think you're probably bringing up something that we're going to come back to. I imagine that it's not all It's not all roses in the garden for everybody at this time of year. Thank you. Dawn, now I know that the listeners can't see this, but I can see you already bedecked in a bit of a Christmassy garb there. And this I think betrays that you are kind of a pretty Christmassy person, right?
I think the simple answer to this is I love Christmas and all things Christmassy from very early in the year. So I don't do early decorations or even send my cards out particularly early. And I feel that like internal festive spirit very early in the year and get very excited about things that are going to happen in the darker seasons and what's going to bring that light that other people have talked about. I think what's really interesting, so I mean, that's a very simplistic answer. I do love Christmas. And I feel like I'm going to steal this from you, Rich, but, the idea of values and pain, that I think Rachel's already alluded to lots of expectations around that particular time of year. And there's years in my life where life hasn't been easy or how I may have wanted it to be. And, in those times, it's really hard. It feels really dark because as much as you love something, you're going to experience the pain of that, right? I think sometimes Christmas also, for me personally, as well as for lots and lots of people, is a time that can be really painful and really difficult. I suppose this is where ACT really helps me because both can be true. I think I hold on to my narrative of I just love Christmas and I can't help but smile when I say it. And it's absolutely true that there are lots of Christmases that have been sad or had elements of sadness, and it isn't a picture of perfection at all. So I think both are true.
Thank you for stealing my values and pain line. It's, saves me the bother. I feel like I'm contractually obligated to say that at least once a day. We sort of talked there about our own views of it. And, for every X Factor panel, there's got to be a Simon Cowell. For every Christmas, there's got to be a Grinch, right? So it feels like, that falls to me. So I've kind of struggled with Christmas, I think, for more or less as long as I can remember. I think maybe I kind of liked it when I was a kid, and then I find it a bit difficult. I think I notice everybody else getting really up for it, and I sort of feel like I should be up for it too, and sort of struggling a bit to do that. And then I feel a bit guilty that I'm not as up for it as I sort of like, finger quotes, ought to be. And I don't quite know why that is. I find the rampant commercialization of Christmas quite hard. And I find the like Christmassy vibe of just, you can't go into the shops without hearing, Christmas music from like mid-November onwards. That said, I do obviously, really like getting together, and I love the sort of connection of it. And I love the joy of sort of giving presents. So let's keep it light, shall we, for a minute? Let's talk about our favourite bits, right? So before they let me steal the show, what's the best bit about Christmas?
I like the Christmas music. I'm just going to say that, seeing as you've just mentioned it as something that brings you pain. I think for me, it's the things that anchor me to that inner joy that Dawn was describing. So anything that kind of triggers that automatic response in my body that has nothing to do with thinking or anything too academic or kind of planned, it's just a physical response in my body, twinkly lights and Christmas music. Also, I can usually hear the lyrics because it's a bit like hymns, isn't it? It's like I can hear the lyrics in those sorts of songs, which is something which is quite rare for me. I always get the lyrics wrong to any kind of popular music type arrangement. So I really like those things. And obviously the joy of seeing joy in other people is part of that too.
Why do you think you remember the words of hymns and Christmas songs?
Because they're easy to hear. It's the hearing. I can't hear. It's like my processing ability. I don't have a good processing ability when it comes to things like that. So, I mean, I can't hear all of them. I probably get them wrong too, but I have less of that anxious response to everyone else is singing the right lyrics and I'm not. And I also don't care if I sing them wrong. I'm sort of, it's just sing along.
Do you think they're just indelibly etched on your brain because you hear them so much?
Yeah.
It's like on a loop year after year.
Yeah. I mean, saying that, I know I actually used to get songs wrong from when I was a kid. You know, there were all sorts of things that I didn't understand the meaning and I got it completely wrong. But it doesn't seem to matter as much because it's just part, like you say, it's indelibly etched on your experience.
Okay, so given the nature of this podcast, there's no way we would have the clearances to play any music. But if you had to name one Christmas song, your desert island Christmas song, what would it be, Ray?
Oh, that is a good question. I had this conversation very recently with somebody. So the way that was phrased, which I think this is probably even better, right? Is like, what's your favourite Christmas hymn, and what's your favourite Christmas song? So I'm going to go. I'll rise to that challenge just because I've rehearsed it already. Oh, come all you faithful, classic, brilliant harmonies in the last verse, and probably Fairy Tale of New York. Obvious, predictable choice probably, but that's a winner, isn't it?
Rachel, what would you say? You raised the topic. What would you say?
I really struggled to identify. Number one, back to my issue with music. I don't know the name of anything. I suppose I probably do better with Chris because it's in the lyrics, isn't it? Yeah. And in terms of a hymn, I wouldn't be able to sort of probably, unless you gave me a list, then I could probably pick one if that makes sense. But I also love it when I hear Fairy Tale of New York. And it is a really kind of bog standard answer in a way, isn't it? But I guess also on where I work, one of my colleagues, Tim, he's absolutely brilliant at bringing music into our units. And every Christmas we do like a Christmas song singing thing. I guess you could say like a carol concert, but it's not quite like that. We do it on some of the wards and the rehab wards, and we sing sort of old pop songs that relate to Christmas, and we always sing that one. Yeah, so that's great fun.
Dawn, what you got?
I was really taken back to my childhood. I've still got a book that I had when I was, I don't know, maybe 6, and it's in the Christmas one of the many Christmas boxes. And I think for that reason, I'm going to say my favourite hymn would be O Little Town of Bethlehem, because I just remember sitting all Christmas. I took it everywhere I went with me. And I remember sitting and there were the words of the songs, but it just had a really lovely picture. And it was the most Christmassy scene. And I remember just like sitting on my own for a little while in all the chaos of family and people playing with toys. And I like the song anyway, but it was just that memory that really popped into my head just then when you asked the question. So I think that would be my favourite hymn for that reason. And I really want to think of something else. I think Fairy Tale of New York is now going to be like everybody's. I really want to think of something else. I suppose if I think about Christmas songs, and I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but if I think about Christmas songs, one of the things that my mum used to do was when we were getting ready for school, when we were children in December, she would put on the Christmas album. It was a vinyl. And so, some of them were a bit more jump aroundy, like as a child, and some of them were Christmas carols. Having Christmas music in the background, I think, is just something it doesn't have to be a specific thing, and I'm not that fussy. It's more the feeling of it and the kind of warmth that it brings, I think. So that's what popped into my head when you asked that question.
So it kind of does sound like there's quite a Pavlovian thing, isn't it? Like the specific hymn, there may be literal qualities of the harmonies, the arrangement and all of that we enjoy, or the cleverness of the word saying Fairy Tale of New York. And there's a whole big chunk that's just Pavlovian, isn't it? That it's that stimulus was paired with times that for one reason or another felt good. And certainly for me, if I was choosing a pop song, it would probably be Back to Slade, Merry Christmas, everyone, with those leather lungs, Noddy Holder screaming, it's Christmas. 1973, I would have been sort of 8 or 9 at the time, which is kind of like peak enjoying Christmas time, isn't it? And that was that time, it had quite kind of radical sound. I've had conversation with people whether this is a hymn or not, because it's like a choral piece that gets performed a lot, but it's not one where the congregation's encouraged to join in because it's too complicated. There's a piece called The Shepherd's Farewell, which, even if you don't know the name of it, if I played it now, I'm sure folks would recognise. And going back slightly to something Rachel said, and Dawn, I think you echoed it, it's kind of all about the vibe. It's this very beautiful, quite wistful piece of music that just adds to the sort of sensory quality with the twinkling lights and everything sort of looking different. all the sensory stimuli being a little bit different, the sounds being different, maybe the smells being different because you've got sort of Christmassy smells hanging around. So yeah, for me, that's kind of one of those. If I'm late at night, the lights are down, hearing that piece of music, that makes me feel, oh wow, this is Christmas.
You've ruined it. I thought we were going for a clean sweep of Fairy Tale of New York, and then you've come up with something that no one's ever heard of.
What? Merry Christmas, everyone.
The shepherd thing.
Oh, the shepherd thing. The shepherd's farewell.
I'm going to have to Google it.
Search it.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, though, Ray, for me, in bringing Pavlov up into this. I think for me, and that's why I wasn't very good at naming a song, or as I was thinking and as you were all talking, I also thought of Slade, but mainly because that's one of the ones we sing every year, when we go around the wards. And so it sort of sticks in my mind. And maybe we will have all heard of the one that you've come up if you play it. But as Dawn was talking about Little Town of Bethlehem, that just brought up all those memories. And I think it's those quieter, more kind of, I don't know, like midnight mass, everything's sort of getting to that point where you're just about to go to bed and have your stocking at the end of the bed. And, there's that bit as well. And there are lots of different sensory experiences. I'm just one of Pavlov's dogs, let's put it that way, when it comes to Christmas.
Dawn mentioning Little Town of Bethlehem just made me think of, I had a 7-inch record of Cliff Richard singing that. But, in a startlingly arrogant move, he didn't just sing the regular one. He rewrote the music, and the cover of it was just a big picture of his face, superimposed on a sort of Bethlehem kind of background, and it appeared that he was topless, there was no t-shirt collar or no shirt collar. Isn't it funny what you remember? What was on the B side? Yeah, and
please don't transform the stimulus for me. Please don't do that.
Yeah, I've ruined it now. Every time you hear "Oh, Little Town of Bethlehem," you're going to think of semi-naked Cliff Richard. You're welcome.
Thanks.
That just adds to me, Mrs. I like shiny things. Let's give me a diverse experience. That just adds extra joy.
Well, sometime I'll tell you the story about walking in the air, but that's probably not one for the podcast.
Well, that's intriguing. Okay. And one thing we definitely should talk about is the kind of religious and secular connotations of Christmas, because I guess it feels like it's a very different experience depending on where you sit with regard to your faith. Obviously, for people who are devout Christians, Christmas is quite a different thing to someone who isn't, or who's a non-believer, or someone who has another faith entirely. What sense can we make of what Christmas sort of is and has become in relation to all of that, do you think?
It's really complicated, hence I think everybody pausing there. When you ask that question, I can just see all the different people around me and their different responses to that, like the reeling about religion, or the being very religious, or the, where I sit, which is I take the bits I like kind of position. And for me, there's something about whatever religion that if it's done, and this is a value judgment, in my view, if it's done well, it is about supporting people and community and creating community around some common set of values or beliefs. And so when you get a church community that functions in that way, then there's nothing better, really. When you're down, there's someone to catch you. When there's just something goes a little bit wrong, somebody notices, you feel seen by your community. And obviously that's not everybody's experience, and it can be very different to that. And when it makes people feel excluded, that's a massive problem for me. Like religious leaders, close family friend who's a Methodist, I can't remember what the term is for a Methodist religious leader, but she's so open and community focused that it wouldn't matter what religion you were, the door would be open to you, And to me, that's the sort of value of some religious beliefs that I kind of can kind of connect with, if that makes sense. And then that links in, Christmas can be the same as that, allowing people to be accepted, to look after the people in the community who don't have anyone else, maybe to enable that sense of value and not just for the sake of it. And that's not going into all the flip side, is it really, which I know other people might be more connected with.
I mean, it's interesting. I suppose the four of us, it's probably fair to say, are relatively secular in our orientation. Maybe we should have made more effort to have a more representative Christmas party. And perhaps that says something about psychologists certainly in a UK context. I can't think of many psychologists that I know who are very religious in terms of their orientation to the world. But yeah, I guess it's a very different experience, and your views of it will differ depending on that. And that said, there is something about the kind of sense of community that cuts across that, I think, and a sense of connection. The fact it's a public holiday in most Christian countries, and that in itself is an opportunity for people to get together. And there is this great long history associated with Christmas of people getting together and breaking bread, and that feels somewhat universal, irrespective of your faith.
I have a very close friend who would describe themselves as very religious, and years ago had a conversation with them about our views of religion. And her summary of her religion, of her faith in a Christian God, is that God is love. And I suppose what then speaks to me is that actually she would describe God as being love, and that guides her actions, it guides her beliefs, it guides her views of the world. And ultimately, the guide that she is taking that drives her to do behaviours that are very kind, very loving, very gentle to other people, very generous. And she's a really close friend because she just has beautiful qualities. And I feel like we share a lot of those qualities. And they don't have to, for me, they don't come from believing in a Christian God. And our behaviours are relatively similar to each other because both of us are driven by a value of love. And so sometimes I think we talk about religion as being something that divides us or something that's different to. I suppose then the conversation I had with her, where we started to then look less so at why do you do the thing that you do? And she might quote Bible passages or things that have been shared in her church. And she might use those as examples as to why she does the behaviour she does. But if we look at the outcome, if we look at the behavioural outcome from both of us, then the outcome of the behaviour was the same. It was kind, it was generous, it was loving, it was giving, it was compassionate, it was forgiving of people. And so whilst the input to us might be quite different, the output from us was relatively similar. And I think sometimes those conversations about religion can feel divisive, or actually, I say this across humanity, like we have more in common than we have as a difference between us. And I think for me, Christmas, even if it comes from a secular place, I've talked about, Ray mentioned the darkness of the season. And, in the darkest nights, we have this hope, this light, this connection, this celebration, this gathering. And that links with what Rachel's just talked about in terms of community. So Christmas feels, although it may come from a different place or a different reason, it feels important for almost the same reason, if that makes sense, if we look at the value of it, even if the beliefs behind that might feel different to people.
It's interesting you talk about that. I mean, interested, I think, maybe doing an episode on religion at some point, but there is something about great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam and Christianity, that sort of are a bit different from the ones that went before it, because they sort of require you to believe in stuff. And there's some evidence that the early days of Christianity were much less like that. And they were more similar to some of the religions that went before, which was more about the rituals and the practices. Didn't require any specific set of beliefs. It was just about the observance of, prayer and those things, and meditation and spirituality, and, connecting to some kind of thing that you might call oneness or love or whatever. And it's something that's kind of happened to organized religion over time, that it's become kind of codified into a set of beliefs. I mean, Christmas is an interesting example in the sense it was only in the 4th century that December 25th was sort of set upon as the date. But the ritual of wanting to get together to celebrate the birth of Jesus is an older thing, and it, it's kind of like that was what was important rather than what date it fell on. So yeah, I think there is something kind of older that survives in this secular version of Christmas that we kind of have now, with red and green and Christmas trees and Santa Claus and all of those other things that clearly would not have been around in the 4th century when people decided it was December the 25th. There is something about connectedness and togetherness and love and giving and those kinds of things which probably are older in terms of the essence of those things.
For me, links into whether we're talking about what's true and what's false, or what are our, as we said, what are our values, or what are the way in which we treat other people, or the way in which we live our lives. And one of the things I love about my job is having so many trainees come through and meeting so many different people who are kind of on their journey to becoming a clinical psychologist. And a lot of the people I've had as trainees come to work with us in our team have had actually quite, I never know whether devout is the right word, because it feels like it's I've got a specific quality about it, but a very clear faith. And they've really helped me to think about it. Obviously, that's just their experience, and they're always really honest about that. This is just how I do my faith, and this is what I believe. But on how to do that in a way that is about, so if you're Muslim, how do you get your head around people's suicidal urges? How do we work with that? All these sorts of questions, which could feel like a divisive, oh, well, that just is not doable in that religion, or, but actually, when you really think about it and you do it with clear values and a way of wanting to come to the world, it's very different, and it can give you more compassion. If somebody's got to the stage where they want to do something that is so apparently sinful in your culture, then what does that mean for how bad things are for them? It's very different than just, oh, well, they must be a bad person, because if they were, otherwise they wouldn't be able to get to that point. It's just a slight change, but it gives more kind of connection and compassion. And for me, that's sort of my constant learning quest, is how do I get more understanding of diverse views so that I can understand better rather than create more barriers and divides, because they're kind of false when it comes to real human connection and meaning, from my perspective anyway.
And I guess for me, Rachel, that sort of takes us to this, I think, often spurious sort of media imposed idea of, the war on Christmas. People shouldn't be saying happy holidays rather than Christmas. I've never heard anybody say happy holidays, but maybe that's a bigger thing in the States. And again, when people use the same word, Christmas, it's not that the whole meaning exists in those syllables, in those sounds that comes out of a person's mouth. That word is a label for a big sort of ragtag of things. And for some people, of course, of a very strong Christian faith, the core of that is a very specific set of beliefs and a very important moment in their religion. And for lots of us, it's a much broader thing, that can then bizarrely, although the word Christmas comes from, Mass of Christ, actually for most of us would include the fact that, but this also includes like New Year's, and it depends how far you stretch it back, whether you stretch it back as far as Diwali, but there's a lot of religious festivals that completely non-coincidentally all kind of cluster around the winter solstice, given that most of the religions that have kind of survived and thrived have been Northern Hemisphere. So when we use the word Christmas, it's like, is it Christmas versus saying lots of different things are going on and it's an important time of year for non-religious people too? Is that like an opposition thing? Or is it that I think a lot of people would use the word Christmas just as a reference to this whole season and all the stuff that goes on within it, without there being this opposition between it's either this or that?
Do you know much about the history of kind of Yuletide and solstice? Like I feel a bit ignorant about a lot of that.
It's one of those things I did get into and I read up on, and passage of years has, of course, sort of faded it out. It's also one of those things that a lot of the traditions clearly come from cultures that didn't write stuff down an awful lot. So, there's a lot of guesswork. So, for instance, we all geographically live fairly close to each other, in the sort of, broadly speaking, Midlands, West Midlands of England. And Rachel and you and I live much closer together, just a few miles away. And in our part of the world, there's this tradition called wassailing. And actually, there's two meanings of wassailing. One of them is going door to door, kind of effectively carol singing. But the other one that still happens in our part of the world is this tradition of going to wake up the apple orchards, traditionally on kind of 12th night. And there's a whole ritual associated with it of people flaming torches, go down into the apple orchard, make lots of noise to scare away the evil spirits, pour some of last year's cider in the roots of the biggest tree, and then sort of ask the tree to wake up and produce us a nice harvest for this year. Then everybody drinks a lot of cider and makes a lot more noise. Have you been to a wassail, Rachel?
I haven't, but I've tried to every year because it just looks exactly up my street, really.
Yeah.
Ritual, light.
Ray, how does one get an invite to this thing? It sounds amazing.
You have to know people.
Is there like a special code?
There is. I heard a brilliant story from one just recently. Part of the thing is making lots of noise. So traditionally it's hitting like pans with ladles and things. But of course, anything that makes noise goes for the bit where you're walking around in circles and driving away the spirits. This being the countryside, and the countryside being what it was, it tends now to involve shotguns as well, often with blank cartridges and a lot of cider, and people with flaming torches introduces certain sorts of complexities. So a friend of mine was at a wassail, and beforehand, the guy who was hosting it, who was a big local character whose farm it was on, had to do a safety briefing for everyone. And so he stood there at the front in his high-vis vest with a clipboard and said, right, I've done the risk assessment for this. Pause. It's quite risky. Right, off we go. So that's a very Gloucestershire approach to health and safety.
I love talking to you. Like, we literally live, like, I could get in my car, it's less than an hour to get to your house, right? And you talk about things that could be just from another planet, like the stuff I've never heard of. What is this now? Like villagers with flaming torches, getting drunk and firing shotguns at Christmas. Who knew? Who knows what goes on where you live?
Well, the point is John Lewis hasn't found a way of monetizing that yet. So that's why other people haven't heard about it. When they do.
Well, long may that continue. But I would like an invitation if you could sort that out for next year.
Life goal for next year, we'll try and get us all to a wassail.
Okay. I like where this conversation has gone, not just because of the shotguns and the flaming torches, although that is great. Just the idea of something older at work here, something more kind of primal about, human beings and our need to connect and our need to celebrate and our need to mark occasions and engage in rituals. So far so good. And something we alluded to earlier, and I think is worth coming back to, given that we all work in contexts where we're spending lots of time with people who are struggling with life for various different reasons, it's clearly not all plain sailing for everybody. What do you think the big contextual factors are that influence whether people look toward Christmas with joy or terror or any other kind of emotion?
Feels like an absolutely huge question. When I start to think about context, it's not just the individual's context, like current context, it's also their historical context. And that includes the historical context of their parents and their experiences of Christmas and what that was like, and potentially their grandparents and et cetera, et cetera. In terms of the rituals that have been built up, one of the things we talked about, Ray raised earlier, is Rachel and I are having Pavlovian responses to Christmas. And that kind of sets my scene for Christmas. So if somebody has a very different history to me, or had a very different history to my parents' experiences of Christmas, and therefore how they were able to set a Christmas example for me and what that felt like, then my experience of Christmas would also be very different, wouldn't it? And so we are a product of our histories, but not just a product of like our trauma that's happened or one event that's happened. We're a product of so much complex history that we're unable to see. And then we try to put language to why we like Christmas or we don't like Christmas. But actually, this is such a complex, going back generation after generation, as to whether we've set up a context for our future children to enjoy Christmas, and what does enjoying Christmas mean? And is it even Christmas, or is it a festive period? Or the question you asked there is absolutely huge. So one thing that came to my mind when you asked the question, Rich, was something I've been very aware of for myself and for loved ones and for my clients, and even broader than that in our society, is just the pace of life that we currently live at. And one of the things I would love to do over Christmas and made a special request for was just to have a day during the whole Christmas period where we do nothing. And what that means is to not be checking emails, not be looking on Facebook, not be scrolling, just having permission to do nothing, and just to think about how we could slow down over that time that I will be off work for a couple of weeks. And even within a couple of weeks annual leave, feeling like there's going to be a lot going on, a lot to prepare, a lot to host, a lot of shopping to do, a lot of present wrapping to do. And genuinely, like, it's very easy then to go back into work in the new year, just still on the treadmill, like having not got off the treadmill at all. And societally, I think we're almost in a stage now or phase now where we praise that. If people are not at burnout level, people are told they're not working hard enough in lots of areas of our work life. And it feels like we're on a constant go, go, go. And that's something I'm really mindful of in terms of the quality of time that we have during any festive period involves a process of us noticing and choosing. And it's a very act thing to talk about, isn't it? But to notice, to tune in, to check in with ourselves and to make value-driven decisions. And one of my value-driven decisions is that I would like some time where I genuinely do step off the treadmill and slow down. And it's really difficult, I think, for us humans to do that. And that links with lots of other things like the commercialism of Christmas and the drive to earn more money or do more or be more or see more people. And sometimes that comes from a lovely place like connecting with people. And then we overbook our social calendars. And that can feel draining rather than nourishing to us. I suppose when you ask the question, there are huge numbers of things that people struggle with at this time of year. And I feel like I've only answered that from a larger society perspective. There are lots of individual circumstances that I haven't even begun to talk about. And I suppose that's the sea that we're all swimming in at the moment in a shared societal context.
That's always struck me. I think that just the stress of it, I think maybe that's one of the things that gets in the way of me enjoying it a little, just because there seems like so much to do. There's just so many additional demands on top of a life that's already busy and full and stressful. Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, I felt completely overwhelmed by Rich's question and thought, God, where on earth do you start? And then your description, Dawn, really resonated with me. And I guess taking it to a more personal level, the last 10 years of Christmas for me have been full of sadness, grief, pain, longing, hope, sense of failure, or a whole load of things for many years now. And yet I still love Christmas and I still want to create something, not something perfect, not something busy, but something calmly connecting with some of those twinkly lights and those moments and those sensory kind of input for my family. And I think that really does come from, like you say, a generational connection with some of those moments. I come from a big family where we used to, every Boxing Day, 30 of us would get together in maybe it wasn't 30 at the time, maybe it was more like 20 in somebody's house with my grandmother as the matriarch. And it would just be this ritual of Christmas that everybody got together, and it was busy, but it was just normal. It felt, familiar. And, I remember going to midnight mass, whether that was with the people from the pub or whether it was with my mother-in-law who wanted to go who was very religious. And that was another kind of ritual. And then we used to have the same people for Christmas every year, and we'd have our family curry, and that was a kind of a tradition that just we knew was there, and it was the same people. And then as we got older, my cousins would make cocktails, and it just and all these things became rituals and traditions that have kind of instilled that feeling of warmth and expectation on a sensory level. Although that has also led to grief when that's had to stop and things have changed, it's also kept that sense, back to a Pavlov, it's kept that sense and that response in me that has helped me to cope with those difficult times. Whereas some of the people I work with, they don't have any of that. They only have something awful that's happened at Christmas, or somebody walked out on them at Christmas, and almost like the twinkly lights remind them of that rather than anything else. They don't have like a foundation or a kind of, something to build on. So we're having to build new things from here, and it's very different, isn't it? It's a very different context. And my Christmases are very different now. They're pared right down, have absolutely nothing that we have to do the regular meal because that's the familiar thing. And we'll have the stockings and we'll do the things. And, this year I think I'm going to try and do stockings at the end of the bed again with the orange in, because we'd stopped that for a while. And, so adding in bits and putting up a few lights, enough just to make it twinkle, but not too many that it means you spend a week taking them down off the roof or whatever it is that some people end up having to do. So it's making those connections, isn't it? But without that massive expectation, and with lots of ability for things to go wrong because you don't have the expectation of it going right.
I think one of the things that's been coming up in this is those kind of like rituals, traditions, call them what we will, and the benefits of them, the things that we like about them, and the things that are wonderful about them. And I think that's also like the gateway sometimes to the difficulties. I don't know about the rest of you, sort of in my practice, in seeing people, I kind of almost always sort of, if I'm seeing people in December, I'll always offer, not just as a social inquiry, oh, what about Christmas, but actually put that potentially on the menu for working on within a session. Because for so many people, it might be that it's just a positive thing, people are looking forward to it, and that's nice to have that bit of light. But also, so often, it's something that people are worrying about and are stressed about in advance, either sort of just generally or very specific things. And I think one of the things is people try to and often do find ways of coping with the most remarkable circumstances. But the ways people sometimes cope with family pressures, or somebody in the family who you have a very poor relationship with, who's been violent to you, or who drinks, or, also there are difficulties. People establish patterns that are around really managing contact and doing it on terms that you can manage, making it minimal. And of course, what along comes Christmas then, with all these wider family rules about everybody gets together for this, everybody sits down at the same time, alcohol is flowing if you're a family that drinks alcohol. And sometimes people's very well established ways of kind of just navigating and surviving complex family life, for this little period, all their coping strategies get taken away from them. And they're forced into a position where all the worst things kind of are right up front and center. And it's harder to escape without causing a scene, causing difficulty. Sometimes that's exactly what people have to do. But I think that's the reason sometimes people approach it with dread, and sometimes reasonably with dread.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me, just to kind of bring it down too much, but things like the EastEnders Christmas special, like it's, or the one that sticks in my, I don't even know if this was Christmas, it might have been Thanksgiving, but there's an episode of The Bear, if anyone has ever seen that, where there's sort of simmering tensions within a family. And it just, it's just there all through the episode of this really busy kitchen with people getting the food together, and then gradually they all sit down, and this is meant to be this nice bit, but then all of the tensions start to emerge, and then it all sort of goes horribly wrong. That's a real thing, isn't it? I know those are dramatizations, but the sort of the tensions that exist within a family, often that's where they kind of become manifest at these moments, because everyone's together. And because there is a sort of level of stress about the whole thing. It's kind of this interesting thing about Christmas, is it can bring out the best and the worst in people. The thing I was going to add just is, it's kind of like the flip side, I suppose, because the theme of this, understandably, has very much been about kind of connection and togetherness. But I guess one of the big contextual factors that's going to influence it in the other way is how connected you are or how isolated you are. It's a bit like the pandemic. That was a very different experience for, perhaps a family living in a detached house who had a nice garden and they could all be together. Whereas someone who's living on their own in a tower block, that's a very different experience. And I think people who feel lonely feel very lonely at Christmas. And that's obviously a really difficult and painful thing for people to have to confront.
I think alongside the actual experience of loneliness, given my area of work interest, has tended to be people who are themselves seriously ill, or they're looking after somebody who's seriously ill, or are recently bereaved. Then obviously, Christmas is one of those kind of focal points. I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons I got into the habit of always raising it in sessions at this time of year, because of that emphasis on people being together. The prospect of this person, perhaps the client themselves or somebody that they love not being around by next Christmas, or already somebody's missing, really comes into much, much sharper focus. And trying to establish not ways of being fine with that, because how could you be fine? It is that pain being the other side of values that means the emphasis on love and togetherness means that is a time that the absence of those things or the prospect of the absence of those things will bring the most pain. And that possibly is an important part of grieving. And rather than just be in frozen horror of how bad those days are going to be, sometimes we can look forward and say, okay, so you're right, it is going to be hard. It is going to really, really hurt. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle that when it hits? Because you're probably right. It probably is going to hit hard. And then get into thinking what a person might choose to do, not to make it feel okay, because it's not going to feel okay, but to honour the person or bring their sort of their presence, as you say, in grief work, that the continuing bond with the person who's died, make that sort of like manifest there. And again, this isn't some fancy new psychology, is it? These are cultural and faith traditions throughout history. The concept of a place setting for all the people who can't be present at a meal exists in many cultures. And I think sometimes one of the ways we can support people at a time like this is giving them the permission and the space to feel bad, even though society is saying you should feel it's a wonderful Christmas time, and also supporting them in making choices about what might work best for them.
Thank you for that, Ray. That leads me on to what I wanted to kind of start to wrap up with, really, is that, and I certainly don't want to play into this myth that psychologists have all got their life sorted, but if there was one thing that you would say helps you navigate Christmas, or something that perhaps comes up in your work with people as a thing that you perhaps recommend, what would you say that it was? Do you want us to expand on anything that you just said there?
Yeah, I'm just echoing what others have said, but, ritual, there's a reason rituals always exist and always get reinvented, and they get constantly reinvented. So now, a ritual didn't exist when I was a kid, was what Christmas films do you always watch? Because we didn't have access to that kind of range. So that becomes a new ritual. So I guess what I would say is kind of create your rituals that are meaningful to you. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. We'll try different one next year. But, do something active that turns towards the sad bits and makes room for them, rather than just being the hope of ignoring it, because that's probably not going to work.
Comes back to that quote, doesn't it? Avoidance only works if you don't know you're doing it. If you know you're doing it, there's something that's problematic about it. So yeah, trying to push something away probably isn't the most successful strategy.
Yeah, it kind of connects with the feel deeply, hold lightly for me. Create rituals, have intentionality, but also have flexibility about how that might happen. Even if your whole Christmas dinner is ruined, you can still sit on a TV tray in front of the telly and have another place setting next to you for the person who's not there potentially, or just imagine they're sitting beside you, leave a space on the sofa. It doesn't have to be done in a specific way. For me, that's the important bit. But if we completely avoid it, then we don't have that opportunity. Like, let's imagine it is our last Christmas with someone and we just avoid spending it with them. Could we instead say, right, it's really important that I spend it with you, and I don't really care how it turns out, but I want this last Christmas to be with you.
Wow, that's hit me in the feels. But there's something about that, isn't there? That idea of time being short, life being short, and treating, it's such a cliche, but there's a cliche for a reason, right? That sort of treating every day as if it was the last one. Yeah.
I've got a colleague who's going through something similar at the moment, and the person who she's worried won't be with her next year, was sort of saying, I don't think I'll come to Christmas because I'll just ruin it for everyone. And she said something along those lines, I think, to her. So don't you dare not come to Christmas. I want you, you have to be there. It might be your last, and we want you with us, and we don't care how it turns out.
Several years ago, it was probably one of my most difficult Christmases. And it coincided with doing lots of professional development as well, and doing some online sessions with Mavis Sai, who's a functional analytics psychotherapist. Amazing lady. And it really made me think about the language we use around Christmas time, around New Year. And there's lots of happy wishes sent to people. So we talk about Merry Christmas or Happy Christmas. And I certainly, in that particular year, was really struggling with connecting with just, unadulterated joy. It was really difficult to see Christmas as just this expanse of brightness and lightness and excitement, because it didn't feel like that inside. And I actually started to change the language that I use, even in my Christmas cards. So if I write a Christmas card now to anybody, I never say Merry Christmas or Happy Christmas. I always now use language like, I wish you a kind and meaningful festive period. And for me, what that does is it gave me permission in my deepest, darkest sadness. It gave me permission to be kind to myself and to be kind to other people. It also gave me permission to still find meaning when it felt like there wasn't any. And I wish that for other people. If you're not troubled at all, and this is your most joyous year, then I still wish you kindness and I still wish you meaning. And if this is your most difficult Christmas, then please, please, please find kindness for yourself, and please find some meaning for yourself. Because I suppose that really summarizes the warmth of the season for me. One of my earliest memories was just standing at a bus stop in the middle of winter, in the middle of Birmingham city centre with my mum, freezing cold, standing in the rain, and lots of strangers would say, what are you doing for Christmas? And it's the warmth that people show around this time that has really sat with me forever. And that's that warmth and that compassion. And if you're isolated and feeling lonely, we can also extend that warmth and compassion to ourselves. We can be more flexible in our language. It gives people permission to be more flexible, more kind, more gentle, less rigid, less rule-bound. Like Christmas doesn't equal perfection if ... When you look back in January at the time that you spend in December, how do you wish you will have spent it? And if from that perspective, can you invite some kindness and some meaning?
Thanks, Dawn. That's really beautiful what you just said. It puts me in mind, just to be a little geeky for a second, some of the content of our previous episodes where we were talking about the use of language. And it's just what you've said has just made me think about, like, have a happy Christmas, like it's a demand, you must have a happy Christmas. But yeah, something like wishing someone a kind and meaningful Christmas. I feel that there's something about that feels a bit different. Thank you. I was my 2 penny theory was just for myself, really, I suppose, and I think it's probably good advice. It's just about slowing down, because I think I can find myself getting so kind of caught up in everything that needs to be done that it all becomes a chore. I remember, it's not a Christmas story, but one of our friends, Jim Lucas, he told me a story once about standing at a bus stop. Like he needed to get a bus into town for work, and he was waiting at the bus stop, and the bus was late. And he said he's caught himself just like looking at his watch and looking down the road to see if the bus was coming, and tutting, and then looking down the road again as if that's going to make the bus come any quicker. And he said he just sort of caught himself in the moment and thought, like, if I spend my whole day like this, I'm going to think that I had no time, when actually I'm at a bus stop. I've got no choice but to wait for the bus. Like, I've got some time. I've got a moment here. And he sort of caught himself and had this mindful moment, and then consequently had a much better day as a consequence. And yeah, I kind of think maybe that would be certainly useful for me, just to like slow down, and maybe that I'd enjoy writing Christmas cards rather than seeing it as a chore and yet another thing on a to-do list. Okay, well, thank you. It feels like it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster, this. I've sort of laughed, and I've been on the verge of tears on a couple of occasions, and maybe that is the most Christmassy thing of all, right? That it's a great big mixed bag of all sorts of things. So thank you for our discussion today. It's been really meaningful, and I hope it's of use to the people that listen to it. There's one thing remaining, one little gift under the tree that we haven't yet unwrapped, of course, and it's a question.
Let's go and ask Ray, shall we?
So, Raymond, I'm going to give you a choice. I wanted to do it in the Grinchy way, but I thought, no, come on, lighten up. The choice is that what I'm interested to hear from you is either the best or the worst Christmas present that you ever received.
You can probably hear the calculation that's going on in my head. Who am I going to mortally insult? And more importantly, are they likely ever to listen to this podcast? Actually, that's a really, really tough question. We're not a family who does like a gazillion presents. You do more when the kids are little and stuff. So there's not actually much scope for a real stinkeroo of one. And as I know, Rich, from personal experience, my wife is a keen knitter, and her knitted products are always very, very high quality and always incredibly welcome. When I was a child, I had aunts who used to knit, but they would never ever take measurements. So I would end up with like sweaters that were built for an orangutan. There's seriously the sleeves will be down at knee level. So I did once end up with a bright purple sweater with 2 lime green bands across it, with sleeves that could have gone on for a mile. So I would probably have to say, although I deeply appreciate all the knitting they did, they kept us warm at times when, needed it. And it was done with love and care. That wasn't a great present.
That is great. Thank you. There's part of me that wonders if that is a sort of dying thing, whether it's just people of our generation that had knitted gifts that they really didn't want. I wonder if that still happens.
In her keenness and generosity of knitting, my wife's always really kind of clear about sort of like, this is a consent-based process. Checking out, does a person actually want this? Am I just putting an obligation for you to think, oh God, where's that thing that she gave me that I now have to wear every time I see her? So hopefully the non-consensual aspects of knitting are declining with time.
It does put me in mind of the sort of horror of growing up in the 70s of someone saying, don't buy one, we can make that. It's like, no, I don't want you to make it. I want the proper one from the shop.
Moment of self-disclosure, I still say that to my 13-year-old son on about a monthly basis, and he rolls his eyes at me and looks in horror.
Keeping the dream alive. Brilliant. So given it's a Christmas party, anyone else want to chip in on answering Ray's question? So the best or the worst Christmas present you ever had?
I can chip in one, but it wasn't for me, I don't think. Or I might have got one because I think everyone got one. So in those big parties that we used to go to on Boxing Day, my eldest auntie, she was a school teacher and she was single. And so we were like all her kids, basically. This whole family were like her kids. And every year she'd buy absolutely everybody a present. And so a lot of them would be from those adverts on the telly for this is the best gadget that you can get. And there was one year I remember she bought almost everybody one of those things that goes on the visor of a car to extend it, like a visor extender. But all the teenage boys who couldn't drive got one too. And honestly, the number of things that she gave like that were just amazing. But it was just it, and I can't say it was the worst present, because it was like it was the highlight of our year. You know, it was like seeing what's Rosie going to buy this year. You know, it was just amazing.
Those are the best, aren't they? They're sort of so bad it's good, but it goes right through bad, around the other side, and is good again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My other auntie, just to add an extra person in, my Auntie Patty has a really great habit of re-gifting, and it's really obvious it's been re-gifted from her present drawer, and it's often quite random. So that's another really good one, and that continues as a tradition.
I think as children, we were incredibly gifted in terms, like I've got two aunties who just spoiled us rotten, and as a relatively small family, there was me, my sister and my cousin. So we got lots of presents that gave lots of joy to the people giving them. So my aunties would come Christmas morning and give us bagfuls of presents, and me and my sister would be opening those. And later in the day, my cousin would come with her mum and dad, my aunt and uncle. And I was opening mine and my sister was opening hers, and we were looking at each other's, and I got a car air freshener. And I was probably 7 at this point. And you know, that feeling of like, you have to say thanks. You're supposed to say thanks. And I remember standing in the middle of my parents' living room, like under the tree with all these presents all around me, and like knowing how lucky I am. And I'm so grateful, and I love my family. And I love that they were always there at like 6 o'clock in the morning. My aunties woke us up one year because they were knocking on the door before me and my sister were even awake. And so I loved the enthusiasm. And then I had this car air freshener, and I was like, what's this? Just wondering what I'm supposed to do, because I don't want to be rude and I don't want to be ungrateful. And I'm 7. Why have you bought me this? And so it just turned out it was in the wrong bag. But then just noticing the shame and the sadness and the guilt and the, oh my gosh, like I was so eager to open presents, I didn't even read the name on it. And so it was intended for my uncle, who's called Dave. And so it just said to Dave, DA. That's probably all I saw. And so I, enthusiastically unwrapped this present and then didn't quite know what to do with myself. So I then tried to rewrap it and put it in his bag before he even arrived on Christmas morning.
Yeah, we're going to have a full house of auntie stories. They seem well placed, don't they, for these presents? So my dear departed aunt Winifred, so she was my great aunt. So that there's a bit of a generational gap here, and she was just so kind. She was a singular character, shall we say? She danced to the beat of her own drum, I think. She was lovely and wonderful. She was very thoughtful. Would always get presents every year, and I remember. I mean, they were always a little out there. And it's quite palpable, actually, the sort of memory of opening her presents with a degree of trepidation, because it's that same thing that you just described there, Dawn, about that you're grateful and there's a bit of anxiety there. But she got me it was a terry toweling, like t-shirt and matching shorts. It was light blue, and she'd also bundled in there a pack of sort of knee-length white socks as well.
Have you still got them, Rich?
Of course, I've still got. No, I don't. But I will leave you with that image of me as a small child in my matching blue terry toweling outfit, white socks in the middle of winter. Okay, well that does wrap it up, if you pardon the pun. And yeah, a big Merry Christmas to each of you. Thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, Merry Christmas to everybody out there. And if I could steal something that's already been said, I wish everybody a kind and meaningful time over the festive period. Take care all.